So, in January 1996, there was an essay entitled "Content is King," and it was published on the Microsoft website. And in this essay, the following statement was made. I'll just read it to you. Content is where I expect much of the real money will be made on the internet, just as it was in broadcasting. The author of that essay is some guy called Bill Gates. Don't know who he is, don't know what's ever happened to him. Obviously, from Microsoft, and he proved absolutely right. He was bang on with that statement. But the content battleground is certainly a complicated one. It's not actually clear who's on the throne at any given moment because it keeps changing. Yes, you have your traditional big players, the free-to-air broadcasters, the pay TV broadcasters. And then recently we've seen influencers and content creators take rights to football leagues. In Europe recently, we've had a Spanish influencer called Ibai, who is very, very close to Gerard Piqué at Barcelona, and he took the rights for Ligue 1. It was his Twitch channel that showed Messi playing for PSG in the league in Spain. And the same has happened with a Brazilian influencer for the FIFA World Cup matches. He's going to be streaming them on his platforms. We've also got the sports OTT platforms. In Europe, we have ones called DAZN and ones called 11 Sports, also the short-form social media players like TikTok. They're all contributing to this discussion. Of course, we mentioned Gen Z already, consuming other non-live content, not just highlights, but behind the scenes, all that shoulder programming, everything that goes around the game itself. So what is the right formula to attract football fans to subscribe, and how does it work here specifically with a focus on African football? We've got another fantastic quartet of speakers and moderator for you, so please welcome a production specialist from LiveU and Crosspond, Keith Farr, director at the Sports Boardroom, Sgwili Gumede, the director at Sportscape Africa, Gary Rathbone, and CEO from BMI Sport Info and SSS Network, David Sidenberg, and chairing this discussion, author Nikolaos Kirkinis. Please give them a warm welcome. Keith, Sgwili, Gary, David, and Nico. Almost gave me a heart attack, guys. Kept me waiting behind the stage there. It's okay. Playing it cool, playing it cool. Nico, you got this. This is a huge area of focus in Europe. I think it will be also the case here in Africa. Nico, over to you for the discussion. Thank you very much indeed.
Nice. Welcome, everyone. I'm really excited about this chat today. I think this is a topic that's of interest internationally. It's a topic that's so essential to our lives as those in the football industry, and I don't think we even appreciate it. So hopefully the distinguished gentleman on stage today can help me bring light to that. I think, we've got a great collection of minds here. So just to catch everyone up, the overview of today's discussion is the following. Despite the broadcasting industry going through multiple changes recently, football remains the global king of live sports. However, certain national markets have started to show signs of slowing down as the consequence of rise of new actors like sports OTT platforms and short-form social media giants, which challenge traditional players who are unable to hold premium property rights. Additionally, broadcasting players are facing a new challenge due to the Gen Z audience, paying more attention to non-linear content such as highlights, behind the scenes, and content created by the fans themselves. Which is the right formula to attract football fans to subscribe? Now, I love chatting about football content because it's one of those things that's so much more than what it seems at first. As football-loving people, as most of the world is, we don't get to actually do the thing that football is often. We don't often get to watch a 90-minute game. That's not the only way we consume football. Every other day of the week, when they're not playing, we need to consume football through other means. And this is where content creators come into it. And historically, content creators have played an important role in actually building societal blocks in times of turmoil where sport has played an important role in bringing peace to the land. So we have a strong tradition of it, especially in Africa, of content really being this really powerful tool that actually shapes societies so much more than the sport it represents. And now we're in a really exciting phase. We're on the precipice of great change, where we are seeing these new models of content creation being generated. And it's like a blank canvas is facing all of us. So it's really exciting to see what we're going to do with it. And I actually want to start with Mr. Gumede, Sgwili.
Yes.
Because I think you would be a good philosophical pilot to ease us into the conversation today.
Sure.
Because you were once quoted as saying, the role of sports in South Africa and societies like Africa is misunderstood. what did you mean by this? What is the role of sports, and what is the role of sport content in society such as ours?
So there's a G20 summit in Indonesia right now. And one of the people that addressed that was Gianni Infantino. And he spoke about the fact that there will be 5 billion people that FIFA expects to tune into the FIFA World Cup in Qatar. He was talking to the 20 of the leading leaders of the world. And part of the plea was, let's try and get a temporary peace, at least during the World Cup, and use the World Cup as a catalyst for that. So that is how important football is. That's how important sport is. When we talk about content, as an example, it's more from being an entertainment, recreational thing to a $50 billion industry, content specifically, that employs a lot of people, that shapes ideas, that shapes lives, that creates economies. So as a global endeavor, sport is 3% of the global GDP. So it is a hugely important industry and an influencer of society and how societies grow and develop. That's what I meant.
Very interesting. So it comes from the commercial side as well, as
Correct.
you highlighted. It's so much more than a sport. It's something that affects livelihoods. Gary, we, as most of the football-loving public, we don't get to see a lot of the behind-the-scenes things. The main way we get to consume football is broadcasters deciding something should be packaged and given to us. And I can imagine, as with any business, there's a bunch of nuances and constraints to how these broadcasting rights and deals come about that we're not privy to. So what is it that the public should keep in mind when we're shouting at the TV because something's being broadcasted and not something else? What is it about how the rights negotiations go that you think maybe the common football fan doesn't really get to see?
Well, I think the biggest challenge is because you're looking at between the pay TV model and the free-to-air model, which are the two key models of broadcasting that exist out there. Free-to-air was around for many, many years before pay TV came on a few decades back and really kind of swept the floor with everything, because there was so much more money out of subscription television. When you have 8 million people, paying you the equivalent of $50 a month, or in something like SuperSport's case, about 20 million people paying you $50 a month, you can actually deliver huge revenues and allow you to go out and acquire sports rights or any content at a very, very high premium, and then price other people out of the market in that way. And so free-to-air has always had a challenge in many ways to try and make it work. And I think that a lot of people don't understand that. I often get that when I was at SABC, where people would say, well, they've got that, why don't you get that? Or, we need that, we want to see that, why are you giving us this and not that? And he said the difference being is because we can't, as a broadcaster, the revenue that we can make from the revenue that we can get from advertising, an advertising-funded process, cannot compete. So I can't afford that. That's been priced out. And so we get things like, okay, this would be a good second-tier proposition. So we can't give you maybe what you want, but we think this is of value. So people need to understand that it's important, particularly in the free-to-air space. You can't actually run any business where your outcome, your expenditure is greater than your income. So, and particularly when it's a public broadcaster where you've got responsibilities to the larger public, to taxpayers, and the like, you have to make sure that you operate in a responsible manner. And that's very much the strategy that I tried to bring into the SABC, was to acquire content that kind of worked to that level. And it also meant in the negotiating process, so a lot of people would come to you and say, we want to sell you this, and say, I'd like that, but this is the price. And I say, but I can't afford that. But I know that you want it and that people want it. Can we try and find a win-win solution? And the problem is that not every time people aren't interested, they say, no, you're pulling my leg, you can't afford that, and you're just trying to take me to the cleaners. And we're not. We genuinely have a number that we can afford or not afford. And these are the things, I think these nuances are what people don't really appreciate about. It's not just a matter of, I want that. It's not like going to a supermarket and all the tins of tomato soup are at the same price. So SuperSport buy one and you buy one and you've both got a tin of tomato soup. It's not like that at all.
It doesn't work. So then let me ask you, obviously it's where the picture you've painted now is that it's important to run a business when you're being a content creator, especially a national content creator. But then do you feel there's any sort of unspoken, I don't want to say moral, but just some sort of responsibility on a public broadcaster to show the things that may not have the most commercial value but are of national importance? So if we have a junior girls team competing in a certain cup final, I'm sure there's not many advertisers jumping to put money behind it, but to what level is the broadcaster, accountable to the public to bring these things to our light?
It's a very good question, and I think it's very important for me as well. It has been a key part of the strategy is to make sure we get that content, because as the national broadcaster, you're responsible for making sure that a wide range of content is represented. And so a lot of it is, and as you say, a lot of that niche content is not going to be, advertisers aren't going to come to the party. So it's a very, very difficult situation to either try and get that content for free on a revenue share basis, and I think this is more important as well, is that when it comes to things that are of national interest, particularly niche content that you can't get sponsorship for, this is where, government should actually, the government sports should step up to the plate and make sure that the broadcaster can do that, because they can't say to you, you should be showing this, but at the same time saying, but you should also be making a profit. You say, look, there's stuff that I can get, I can make a profit on, but the stuff that I can't get, that I need to broadcast, then you need to actually step in as the government to kind of help us and deliver that. But I do think that there's a lot of other ways and means, and I think this is kind of what we're going here, is that we've got a lot of new ways to kind of monetize these things. And I think this is what's exciting about the future. There's going to be more opportunities for more niche content to get out there.
Okay. Dave, you've obviously had a lot of experience in the commercial side of things. And I've seen you in previous presentations before do a great job of clearing up complex subject matter. So I want you to clear up something for us today.
I think a lot of people would disagree with you. But
I want you to try and clear up something complex for us today that even myself, I'm struggling to understand when it comes to content creation. What or who is the product nowadays? Back in the day, it was quite easy. You sold out football games, people bought tickets, or that was sort of how the money was generated. Nowadays, are brands realizing the same value from football? And the brands that are realizing the value from football content, where is that value being realized from? Is it data collection? Is it just brand recognition? Where's the product and who's paying for it nowadays?
so, I mean, sure, not a small question to start with. Let's just throw it out there.
For the Giants.
Look, I mean, I think the problem we all have is we try and box things, and the world's moving too fast to box it. So we have technology changing, broadcast rights, new platforms. We can't even keep up with the definitions when we sell broadcast rights because they change before the contract's finished. And in particular, you'll see the large pay TV producers. What do they want? They want subscribers. They need exclusivity, which goes against the grain of more ways of delivering content. They need that exclusivity so that you pay for that exclusivity. But so we constantly have this balance that every sports person, federation, rights holder has to make between eyeballs, thousands of eyeballs versus money, pay TV versus free versus some hybrid model that allows for a compromise. Even when a free-to-air or pay TV acquires those rights, the missing link is how do we then commercialize them correctly? How do we then repackage them to bring on not just the sponsors in the game, but the advertisers to make it more viable, that the money throws through? And so, because I start as a researcher first before a commercial person, the numbers tell you. So the product is different for each person. The product may be an LSM 9 to 10 demographic, it may be a 4 to 6 mass market. And even if you're in football, and you believe that football is, for example, the product of the masses, then you didn't have to go back and say, are we reaching those masses if we're on behind a paywall versus behind an SABC? So, a classic example is, I'll pick on another sport, netball, which is a women's sport that has only been on SuperSport behind pay TV for about 10, 11 years, Gary, when SABC pulled out. For the 2019 World Cup, where our Protea ladies made it to the semifinals, And we talk about 58 million people cheering behind our ladies at a World Cup, which should be governed by CASA, or Ofcom regulations for national teams representing their country at major World Cup events. And 44,000 people got to watch the semifinal. Not 44 million, 44,000. Think about that for a minute, right? And so now fast forward 2 weeks ago, a month ago, we had the African qualifiers, because we're hosting the same World Cup here in Cape Town, 2023. The mascot launch that was done at the beginning of the at the beginning of the tournament, had 450,000 people watch on Morning Live on SABC, which was bigger than the cumulative audience for the tournament in 2019.
Wow. Okay.
And so the trade-off between, yes, exclusivity versus, you can't grow a sport if it's behind a paywall. I mean, we know that. Look what happened to boxing and other sports over the years. There has to be some level of accessibility. Now, live has a place, and it may need to be here, but we need streaming, we need short form, we need all different variations and platforms so that we do get to reach all the other people.
Most people, okay. Keith, you're a man for the future. I want you to tell us a bit about what
That's
the
a lot of
future.
pressure.
He's telling us we're old.
I want you to tell us
he's
a bit
giving you
about
a
what the
compliment.
future looks like. There obviously is no content without production. You're involved in the production side, and you're currently tinkering with some very innovative models of what can be done in terms of a content production thing. If you can you shed some light on what sort of models people are looking at for production and content?
Okay, with this amount of experience here, I'll be very brief, but we always try and work backwards. So we say, what's the objective, and how can we satisfy that objective? And what Gary was saying about being niche is actually these two coming together in the same environment. Because if you're doing a niche piece and your objective is to put it into the right environment by paywall or potentially within a platform like Yabadoo, which in Cameroon streams at 360p at under 2 megs, suddenly now you can open up your whole defined area to be targeting people that have $10 American to spend in a year to watch that platform. So again, it's working backwards from where you're trying to get to, the objective, and then tailor-making your presentation and your production to satisfy that. Okay. So again, in that criteria, in Cameroon, we're looking at doing remote production because financially, at a peg mark of about $7,000 to $10,000, we can do a 4 to 5 camera mix remotely, which satisfies the criteria to do a broadcast, which ipso facto means you can then charge $10 a year for people to be on that platform. I sound like I know what I'm talking about, but in reality, what we're saying is that for you to satisfy the criteria on a business case, you've got to do the numbers. And I mean, everyone here has the experience of knowing that those numbers sometimes don't handshake. Yeah. So you've always got to be willing to walk away. And as a streamer competing with the big dogs such as Supersport and Supersport and Supersport, you've got no choice but to be innovative. And therefore, it follows as well that your production solution is got to be fluid and has got to be so agile that sometimes, and I'm going to be very technical here, sometimes some of your advertising is put downstream, not in-stream. So, I mean, I think football is always innovative with this, the way that they've been doing little triangular banners next to the goals that are virtual. Now, 5 years ago, that was very difficult to do because motion tracking wasn't able to handle that movement of the camera. And during COVID, we saw banners on stadiums and everything where people should have been, but innovatively, again, that tracking was integrated into a live presentation. So I think if you combine bonding, you combine remote production, you combine the infrastructure and broadband expansion, and you look at Africa as a market, we can actually leapfrog Europe, in my opinion, based on the fact that if I've got someone, and I think Vodacom did this brilliantly in the 90s, where they went, sure, you've got contracts, but actually you've got Ugogo needs to be online or be able to make a phone call. She's got R2 a day. Let's go pay as you go. We broke that market apart in South Africa. When I say we, I mean like I was watching on the sideline, you know. But the point remains, we were able to see a revenue stream that everyone else in the world was like, what do you mean you're going to get poor people to spend money? Because that was their prejudice. Okay. And I think that's where we're sitting on. It's really exciting. But again, what Gary has to say about niche, he's hit the nail on the head. Underwater basket weaving is a sport. Let's film it. Someone's going to watch it. Yeah. That's as simple as it gets.
If you can do it cheaply enough and distribute it, then you can...
but that goes back to your objective. If you can get the straight line to go backwards, then you're joining the two bits together.
100%.
So just in summary, we're very excited about the opportunities also with women's sports. Because just like SAB realized, women drink beer. Advertise to them, or just take the sport to that environment. There are lots of women out there who play sport, who are interested in it. They're mothers, they're caring people, they want to be involved in the environment. And I think we're probably 20 years behind where we should be, maybe 40 years. But there's a big opportunity in that environment.
It's interesting. I know women's sports is actually something this whole panel is quite passionate about, and I think it's definitely worth exploring. Sgwili, I even saw your tweet a little while ago, how disappointed you were to see Brazil playing Banyana to an empty stadium after they'd just been champions. If that doesn't do it, then what does? And, actually, and that's maybe an interesting thing to even ask you about, Keith, because you've been involved in a lot of live production and a lot of live sports, making things happen on the ground. We used to have full stadiums. This is for men's and women's football. They've gradually emptied, and almost every theory people seem to bring up seems to be blown out the water, because sometimes people complain about quality, but here we have a national women's team that has outclassed all their peers, playing against one of the best national women's team in the world, and we can't fill a stadium. Keith, what would you do if you were tasked the mission of filling the stadiums again?
I'd go for an acronym. I'd go stream, screen, and satellite. Satellite actually is a bit of a euphemism because it also talks to bonded, uploaded technologies, such as a LiveU connection to a server, and many other broadcasters can pull from there. But my real point is that I think you want to acknowledge that the first part of any production is a production, and it's almost like a piece of theatre. It starts at the stadium. So is the lighting good? Can I see the event? Is the sound okay? Can I actually have an event that works in situ where you are? Because then, if you're showing that on TV and the sound is good and the lighting is good, suddenly people are going to be attracted by the product. And the product is a production. It's not just a game. Thirdly, I'd make sure that I get diversified and expanded distribution using the backbone that is evolving at the moment, and that is via IP-generated content, going straight to people like the BT Tower, distributing through that, et cetera, et cetera. And obviously I'm talking massive events, but also on a micro level, maybe that's where you want to be heading with, school games. But internationally, people can be watching stuff, et cetera, et cetera. My point behind it is that you can't just see the event landing here and then being broadcast. If you also haven't promoted the event, it's going nowhere. Like if you live stream the Soweto Marathon, but you haven't been promoting it for 3 weeks, who's going to watch it? And if you live stream it and then you take it away from the main broadcaster and then your live stream only gets 1,000 people, who's to blame? Again, I'll go back to my previous point, and the most important thing is, what's the objective? If your objective is weak, do another business case, because you clearly aren't satisfying the criteria.
Okay. Sgwili, what excites you about the future? I mean, as I said, we're at this place of great change. We're on the precipice. We're seeing suddenly new things of content creation come out. Think about locally, Diski TV. These are just guys, former journalists and former players who grabbed a camera, started heading to different street corners and just commentating as fans. And it's proved to be wildly successful. It's got commercial support. And then, of course, we still have our traditional broadcasters. We have our traditional papers. We've got a world of content creators, and we're at this time where we've got this generation, this groundswell of Gen Z coming up, who are really savvy with phones and technology, and they're also generating content. They also love football. So what, in your opinion, what are you looking forward to about the future of content in football?
That more and more people understand that there's many different groupings here. There is sports fans, but there's casual sports fans who are the vast majority of the people, and there are fanatics who want to know everything about everything in sport. And there's everything in between. And there's underwater basketball fans who make up just 0.2%. But effectively, if you start understanding that all of these different sub-communities also need something for them, then you're beginning to realize that the fan is going to be better served. I think as we speak about this conversation, we have to remember that all of these things are about the consumer, the sports fan, and sometimes we just don't do enough. So talking about Banyana Banyana playing in an empty stadium, I remember thinking to myself, how could we be playing the African champions versus the South American champions playing here, and we not only have we not promoted this thing properly, but we just haven't done anything to make it attractive. And I always make this example that the biggest and most successful brands like Coca-Cola, who have been there for 150 years, they still spend money today like they are a challenger, because consumers need to be reminded, consumers need to get those messages all the time. So I'm hoping that part of these conversations are making rights holders realize, in particular, that fans are consumers who have options all the time. And until they understand who those fans are, what they want, and how they want stuff, you're going to continue to see effectively fans doing everything else but watch sport sometimes. And that's where we're losing it a bit.
And the fans becoming more sophisticated.
Absolutely.
So they actually have an understanding of what is good production. They're not willing to settle for crap, really.
Yeah.
That's where we're at. They don't want to
choice.
be. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they want to have more
patronize
choice as well.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Dave, on that point, do you think there's something to be learned? Do you think there's something that football can learn from the way other sports package their content? And particularly a guy like you, who's got an eye for justice and wants to see women's football being, on the same level as men's football, especially in how the content is consumed. And we look at a sport like MMA, as brutal as it may seem from the outside, they've done a really good job of packaging men's and women's fighting in the same event. So you have no option but to support both at the same time. And it's helped both sports grow immensely, and it's helped the audience base be more diversified. So are there other models of content creation, other sports that you think football can learn from?
Well, I think everybody, not just football, but anybody that's at the top can learn from someone at the bottom. Someone that's doing something, that someone has the ability to change the way things have always been done. And so one of the challenges for senior level football, for PSL, for the equivalents in the rest of the world, for FIFA, is you have broadcast rights that are sewn up for 10, 15 years. Particularly in America, where they do NFL deals for multiple years. And even the NFL, if you look what they've done with their senior football, which is a different football, obviously, they've broken it up to 9, 10 different broadcasters rather than one on different platforms. And so the short answer is look what you can do with women's sport. Now, we can talk about why women's sport is so exciting because it's the right time, there's so many things, that England wins and now it's the perfect moment, and Banyana wins and that was the perfect moment. But the reality is it is in this unique sweet spot right now where the rights aren't over-commercialized, where the rights aren't tied up for 5 years, where they can leapfrog with technology, that they don't have to wait 40 years for the next contract renewal of broadcast. We are in the most, I think, exciting time in sport, and particularly broadcasting, in our history, because of the speed at which it's moving, because of the different platforms. I mean, whether it's, we've seen some of the exhibitors today going out with AI cameras and creating content, hours and hours of content that's getting cheaper and easier to produce and better quality at a fraction of the price on stuff that we never even thought of producing before. So accessibility has to grow. There are different delivery mechanisms. You can watch it on your phone. Data costs should be coming down to enable these things. And so we had we were judging, Gary and I, last week at the Sport Industry Awards, and some of the things that caught our eye on fan engagement were things that had no rights to content. Box Squad. Gary can talk about this better than me, where they're just getting little clips like everybody else, but what they did with that website, what they created behind it, they have 1 million subscribers now. They're generating
2.5 million.
2.5 million. I see how quickly it's going. They're generating 5 million rand a month as a new commercial revenue model, which rivals what everyone else is doing on the main platform, if not better. And that's paying for the sponsorship. That's through a mobile platform. I saw Nevin earlier today with fan mode. The whole idea of fan engagement. Vibe casting, instead of one to many, many back to one, and putting it on the screen. I think I've lost myself here. And putting it back on the screen. There are so many opportunities that are affordable now. you know, and that's what we need to move the conversation to. Gary, maybe you pick up on this, because, well, I fixed my mic.
It's called some sort of hospital pass there. Thanks, David. Well, I mean, if I could add to that, basically, I think the key thing, and I think we're talking here about new content models and how to kind of monetize these things. And I think this is what it is. Because the digital space is allowing us to kind of fragment, and I use the word not in a negative way, but in a positive way. It means to create many more touch points for both advertisers and sponsors and fans and audiences. So that if you take something like, so we're actually launching tomorrow, in fact, the SABC Sport OTT platform is actually going live tomorrow. And the thing about that is that, you know, it'll have the live streaming of the SABC Sports channel. There'll be live events, but around that there'll be a whole lot of OTT content, sort of like pre-event stuff, other news stories, fixtures, results, behind-the-scenes stuff, little feature documentaries, games and things like that you can play that might relate to that, so that you come into the space and it's not just a matter of a passive experience of watching something, but you can engage with it. And then you have this platform where sponsors and advertisers can then, you can reach to them, they can reach the audiences can reach back to them, because you've got this hub that sits there, and you create this conversational flow around ostensibly a live match, but it's a lot more than that. It's the conversation before, during, and after, and you're capturing it in a single space. And that offers a lot more value to both the people watching as well as the advertisers, because now they can engage with the audience properly, and they can actually, you know, really understand who their audience is and give them something and get the value that they want. And it means that they'll pay more for it because they're getting more out of it, you know?
Okay. And I mean, Gary, in your opinion, do you think that these OTT platforms and these new things you're mentioning, do you think it will ever come to completely replace the traditional way of doing things, or is there an element of traditional broadcasting media that is just going to be with us for life, for better or for worse?
Look, I think the traditional element will always be there, because, I mean, you, at the end of the day, I mean, we all talk about now people are more fragmented and they only want to watch highlights and bits and pieces, and that their time spans are getting short, attention spans are getting shorter. I don't quite buy that, because I do see things changing already. If you look at a lot of the premise that people used to say, no, you've got to go into this all very, very short form stuff because that is where it is. And it didn't prove to be the case at all. When it comes to a sports event, and we talk about football here, when people want a football game, at the end of the day, they want to watch that game. And you want to watch the highlights to catch up on things, so not every game that you want to watch, it still needs to be there. So this is why I always think that people misunderstand the terminology when they say about OTT and the over-the-top thing, because that's what it is about. It's saying, like, how do we enhance that traditional broadcast rather than change that traditional broadcast? You know, you're not going to take it away. You're going to make it. You're going to add to it, basically. And I think that's the key thing.
I wanted to substantiate that in a maybe cliched or controversial way. I think what's happened with something like Drive to Survive, it's proved that there's a back-end story.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
And then the narrative of, or even something that would appeal to you is the storytelling. I think there's a story to be told in every game. I think because it's niche,
exactly.
You know, if we're going to look at women's football and how that could be expanded upon, why aren't we going in and seeing the stories of those people battling against the adversities to get where they are?
Those are the stories we need to tell. We need to create
this is exactly
these personalities.
That's the
we need
depth.
to know who they are. The fan wants to engage with it.
That's the depth we can go to, because everyone knows where Pele used to come from and how certain people used to be able to dribble with golf balls than tennis balls. You know, that's almost an urban legend that's been segued into our very DNA. In the same way, we want to do the same thing. So when I talk about live streaming, I go back to the phrase again of production. It's got to be a holistic piece that doesn't just sit as a live piece. There's all these other bits that go with it to make it one package, and that's what you're producing.
But it doesn't need to be a 10 million rand production. It can be a 1 million rand production to a different audience, which is equally good and has a bigger audience.
So the key here is the curated content from young people, in my opinion. That's where the technology, remote curation comes into the equation as well. If you can get someone with a cell phone on the sideline, but you can curate their content before you integrate it into, that again forms part of a production sort of storytelling piece. So it's all these, using the tools effectively.
Interesting. So, I mean, Sgwili, maybe also you can come in here for a point, because there's an element that's difficult about this conversation. It's something that can't be pinned down in a business model. It's something that cannot be theorized out of a book. There's something that sports fans are addicted to. It's authenticity. And you know, I wonder what you think that role plays in sports content going forward. For example, I know you've before in a tweet expressed disdain for having to be subjected to English commentators when watching different kind of football.
Yeah.
And that's and I agree with you. There's an element where I like to hear something authentic. I like to see something authentic when I'm consuming my football. But as things are becoming more fragmented, more digital, do you see things becoming more authentic or less?
Well, I don't know. I don't know if there's an easy answer to that. I think on some level there will be, because there's just a lot more voices now that tell the story. For a long time, for example, the only time in the Premier League, all we would hear is Sky commentators, as an example. Now there's Sky, there's BT, and there'll probably be Amazon Prime. So there's a lot more players.
On SABC, the EPL's now with South African commentators.
Correct, exactly.
And
there's a lot more of rights holders who are now saying you could produce this in-house and have your own voices. So I think that when the World Cup comes around next time, it won't just be SABC and SuperSport that pitches up to beat. It will be Apple. It will be Netflix. There's a lot more players who are coming into the space, and with that, I think the consumer is getting much more out of that. Certainly, the consumer is going to be the beneficiary. But there's one thing that we haven't spoken about here, because we talk about African football. A big chunk of what you're talking about here also has to be about how the African rights holder, the SAFAs, the PSLs, the CAFs of this world, are helping broadcasters, are helping package their own content in a manner that is attractive to the fans. So we have to understand that broadcasters can do so much. But if CAF says the match is taking place today and actually it doesn't happen, it takes place tomorrow, there is a lot more to be said about how the game is being run on the continent that is affecting the way we are able to attract audiences and keep them. And there's no broadcaster can save a bad and a badly organized rights holder. And there's something to be said about that, and perhaps we don't have enough time, but we can talk here until we're blue in the face. But on the other side of a broadcaster is a rights holder who has to stage the game at the time that they said they will stage it, and they're providing the facilities and the things that the broadcaster needs. So there's a lot more to be said about how to create new models.
Okay, Dave, what do you say to that?
I want to pick up on what all three of you said, which is let's go back to the basics. It has to start with good content.
Yeah.
That means that all the stakeholders are part of the show. It's not just a game, as Keith said. It's all the pieces. It's the lighting. It's the LED boards. It's the kit. It's having fans in the stadium, because fans in the stadium is better to watch than an empty stadium. It's having the right size stadiums for the right match. You watch, and I've read, especially now since England won in football, and now women's football is the biggest thing in the world for the moment. But you look at the stadiums, and it's the same thing with English rugby. They're small stadiums, 5 to 10,000. They look full. You can hear the fans. They're part of the game. It's great for TV. And then we'll have the same 5,000 fans at FNB Stadium, and it looks like a disaster.
Go and watch Maritzburg United played Harry Gwala. It's one of the best experiences ever.
Yeah, right.
You almost feel like you're on the field.
Pitch. You're part
There's
of
a
the
great
game.
vibe. It's a family environment. And that you can't substitute for that, because the right place, the right time,
It's
the right
understanding that you're putting on a show. I was thinking also about language, and you mentioned Netflix. Now, anyone that's watched Money Heist or any 1,000 different featured language programs, it's always better in the original language with the subtitles, because you get the nuances, you get the flavor, you get the passion, you get the engagement. And so it's all part of the show. It's all part of the entertainment. And, we lived in broadcasts where, and it still happens with pay TV, that exclusivity and live is the killer content, right? That's the king. And that still holds true, because there's very few things left that are appointment viewing that are live, that you have to be there and watch. To watch the game 2 in the morning after you know who won, it's never as exciting. But that doesn't mean that everything else around the game, before, during, after, the profiling, the stories to be told, as you mentioned, with Formula One, before that with Michael Jordan. We have a number of wonderfully produced locally, Two Sides, the Pimpy Story, et cetera, that are phenomenal. But it's not enough just to produce the good content. We have to make sure it gets out, and we have to make sure we're telling the story and that people get to hear it.
Can I just jump in there very briefly? Technically, one of the other things which I think could be happening more robustly is acknowledging that there are other objectives when content is captured. From all the ISO cameras, from the TX, there's an opportunity to be sharing that dynamically with all the sports coaches, with the VAR. I just think that workflow, once you get into the cloud and you acknowledge that the cloud is the power behind everything, you can then distribute that so much more reliably and economically. So then all of a sudden now, those lower second-tier teams who are needing to do sports analysis can have access to something which previously wasn't even on their radar. So in South Africa, and specifically Africa, this is where we can break apart this constraint, and it's just one of those things that's obviously evolving with time.
Can I ask you a question? Because you're the technical expert here, right?
Beg your pardon?
You're the technical expert. You're the producer.
Yes.
FIFA doesn't need 16 cameras to make a live broadcast better. They need 16 cameras for the esport game that comes afterwards.
Yeah, most definitely.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, esports is a whole other kettle of fish, but certainly, yeah.
The whole point of it is the different angles. It's the other content you can create after for multiple different purposes, which is revenue-generating models that allow more of us to get in the game, monetize it, commercialize it. And at the end of the day, it's not just one product. I think that's what we're all saying.
And last point on that, Sky Germany Sports have just done handball with integrated 5G iPhone capturing within the environment. Now, that would have been a swear word a year ago. It probably is still a swear word.
Probably is.
Yeah. So that again, there's also a bit of an elitism going on that you need to address. Okay, thank you.
Interesting. Gary, as our most experienced panelists, I actually want you to have the sort of last word here. And I want you to think from a philosophical and a legacy perspective. What does the young generation of content creators that are coming through now, what do they need to keep in mind for them not to lose the soul of football, for them not to lose the football audience? What principles do they need to stick by?
I think everyone's touched on it already. It's basically keep control of the idea of the story, the narrative, everything that our whole lives, all our lives, and it has been from the beginning of time and will continue to the end of time. Everything is around narrative. Everything has value around narrative and story. As long as you can keep telling that story, whether it's in the live event or the build-up to it or afterwards, narrative is what drives engagement. And so whether you take it into any kind of multiple digital elements and things like that, whatever you do, don't ever lose sight of the story that needs to be told, whether it's, as I said, whether it's live or like that. Hang on to that, and the soul will always be there, because that's where the soul of all sports content, of anything that matters, is in the story.
Fantastic. Thank you, Gary. Well, ladies and gentlemen, our time is up. I hope you enjoyed the chat. Thank you very much, Keith Farr, Sgwili Gumede, Gary Rathbone, and Dave Sidenberg.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, it was a pleasure.
Thanks, Nicholas. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Super conversation, guys. Thank you very much indeed. Off you go to the stage to our left. Really appreciate all of your insights. Again, I mean, I'm learning all the time here. We've got some very sharp minds here. This is where the football industry meets. We bring you the best minds, the sharpest minds in the business. So just to kind of summarize a little bit of what you heard there, some great context from Sgwili in particular about content, about moving from a recreational thing to a $50 billion industry, a huge influencer of society, and how complex this marketplace is. You've got your casual sports fans and you've got your fanatical sports fans and everything in between. And these fans are savvy and they are tech savvy, and they want what they want, how they want, when they want, and preferably for free. And they are very sophisticated in how they go about telling you that as well. From David, some good sort of, again, really sort of basic knowledge here about how we have to, go for eyeballs, but then also go for the money. There's always that little trade-off, isn't there, between, people who are free-to-air, people who are behind a paywall, but there has to be some level of accessibility. That is key. We need streaming, we need short form, we need all of these people to be able to serve the whole of our viewership. And Gary equally, with some very important messaging about being responsible, being sustainable. And then that last point I thought was very important. It's about telling the story. It's about narrative. Never lose sight of that. Even with all of the tech options and all the different ways that we have to stream, to show things to our audience, don't ever lose sight of the narrative. And Keith as well, as a streamer competing with the big dogs, you've got to be innovative. You've got no choice. That is the one card you can play. The solution has got to be agile, and it has to be a production. You can't just stick anything on any platform. Think of it as a spectacle. You've got to try to attract the viewer in. And very excited about the opportunities within women's sport in particular. In fact, that's going to be a topic for us a little bit later on here on the main stage. We're 20 or 40 years behind where we should be, but there is a huge opportunity in that environment. And Keith came up with my favourite quote of that session, which was, "Underwater basket weaving is a sport. Let's film it. Someone will watch it." I'm looking forward to seeing that, whether it be on SuperSport or SABC or maybe an individual streamer.